The cold wasn't from the winter air seeping into the ancestral hall. It was the ice that had crystallized in her veins, watching the man she called father hold the ceremonial dagger. Its edge caught the flicker of the red candles, glinting like a malicious eye. Kang Xinyue's wedding gown, a masterpiece of embroidered phoenixes and peonies, felt like a shroud. The weight of the pearl and gold headdress threatened to snap her neck. It wasn't hers. None of it was. It had been stripped from her chambers that morning and now adorned her younger twin, Kang Xinya, who stood simpering beside their eldest brother, Junjie. You understand, Xinyue, her father, Kang Ziyuan, said, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd spent a lifetime fruitlessly chasing. This is not malice. It is balancing the scales. Scales? Xinyue's voice was a raw scrape, all her tears spent hours ago. What scales? Third brother, Juanhu, the warrior with the brain of a brick, shifted impatiently. Don't play the fool. In the womb, you stole her nourishment. You were born strong. She was born frail. Every cough, every fever she suffered since that's on you. A life of debt. The absurdity of it finally shattered the last of her numbness. A debt? For an act I had no consciousness of? Am I to be punished for the whims of nature? Second brother, Junwei, the merchant, sighed as if she were a poor investment. It's not punishment. It's duty. Xinya is gentle, delicate. She needs the protection and status the Duke of Omping will provide. You're resilient. You'll manage. Manage. The word echoed. She had managed to beg and bribe a reclusive scholar to tutor Junjie, grinding ink until her fingers bled, ensuring he passed the imperial exams. She had managed to negotiate with cutthroat traders for Junwei, swallowing insults to secure his first capital. She had managed to convince their father to send the brutish Juanhu to the military, where he'd found his purpose. She had managed their household, their lives, their rise from obscurity. And now that they stood on the precipice of true power, their father's political star rising, Junjie's literary fame spreading, Junwei's wealth growing, they needed her to manage her own obliteration. Xinya took a delicate step forward, her hand fluttering to her chest. Sister, please. I don't wish to take this from you. But the Duke, he is a man of such refinement. I fear your direct manner would only bring him discomfort. I do this for the family's honor. A single, perfect tear traced her cheek. The brothers visibly softened. Rage, hot and purifying, flooded Xinyue. My direct manner? The manner that built you all a foundation? And you, she turned to Junjie. Who knelt in the snow for 3 days to get old Master Lu to teach you? To Junwei. Who drank with those bandit merchants in the western taverns to secure your silk route? To Juanhu. Who bandaged your wounds after your first brawl and told father it was a training accident? Their faces tightened, not with guilt, but with irritation. Her memories were an inconvenient ledger they longed to burn. Enough. Kang Ziyuan barked. Your contributions were your duty as a daughter. This is your final duty. You will sign the betrothal transfer documents. You will leave tonight for the nunnery at Cold Mountain. Your name, your identity, your very existence as Kang Xinyue will be given to your sister. In return, we will ensure you are not want for necessities. The nunnery. A living death. She looked at their faces, her father's implacable resolve, Junjie's cold intellectual detachment, Junwei's calculative gaze, Juanhu's aggressive impatience, and Xinya's mask of pained benevolence. These were not family. They were a committee assessing a faulty asset. She drew herself up, the heavy wedding robe suddenly feeling like armor. No. The silence was profound. They hadn't expected resistance. She had always yielded. What did you say? Juanhu growled, taking a menacing step. I said no. The words were clear, ringing in the incense-heavy air. I will not go quietly to my grave. I will not sign away my life. If the Duke is to be deceived, you will have to drag my screaming body from this house and explain the commotion to the entire court. Fury erupted. Her refusal shattered their carefully constructed narrative of peaceful sacrifice. Juanhu lunged, but it was Junjie who moved with chilling precision. He grabbed the ceremonial dagger from their father's hand. You always were selfish, he hissed, his scholar's eyes gleaming with a fanatic light. Consuming from the womb to this very moment. You consume our peace, our future. You leave us no choice. The betrayal was so absolute, it was almost peaceful. The dagger, meant to cut the wedding cake, plunged into her abdomen. A different, deeper cold spread. Junwei, ever practical, held her arms. Jiwon, who watched, his earlier aggression replaced by a grim satisfaction. Her father turned his face away. Xinya's eyes were wide, but with a spark of triumph she could no longer conceal. As the world darkened at the edges, pooling like spilled ink, their words swirled around her. Oh, her a lifetime, now she finally pays, clean up the mess. The final image was not of her family, but of the wooden phoenix carved on the roof beam, trapped and burning in the candlelight. If there is a next life, her soul screamed into the void, I will be the fire. I will be the one who consumes. Consciousness returned with the scent of plum blossom and the sound of arguing. Xinyue gasped, a sharp, clean breath filling lungs that should have been still. She was on her knees, not on the cold stone of the ancestral hall, but on the woven reed mat of her old room, her girlhood room. The one she'd shared with Xinya before their fortunes changed. The voices from the main hall were unmistakable. Suin, be reasonable. The general's mansion is a world of soldiers and strife. What life is that for a delicate girl? Her father's voice. A life of honesty, her mother's voice replied, strained but firm. Lady Suin. Which is more than you can offer them now. The divorce decree is signed. I am marrying Morongqing. The girls choose their path today. With me to Xiling, or with you in Luojiang. Xinyue staggered to her feet, her body whole and unharmed, clad in a simple blue dress. She pressed a hand to her stomach. No wound. No blood. Only the ghostly memory of steel. Rebirth. The word, forbidden and miraculous, blossomed in her mind. Heaven had heard her curse. Or perhaps her own will had been so fierce it tore a seam in fate. She walked to the door, her legs steady. In the main hall, the scene was etched in memory. Her mother, beautiful and resolute, standing by the door. Her father, looking pinched and opportunistic. Her 3 brothers, arrayed behind him like a sparse army. And Xinya, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes large and tragic. In their previous life, this was the moment Xinya had chosen. She had flung herself at their mother, speaking eloquently of a daughter's duty to ease a mother's loneliness in a new, harsh home. She had chosen the wealth and title of the general's wife. And Xinyue, the dutiful leftover, had stayed with the brothers who would eventually kill her. I will stay with father, Xinya's voice rang out, clear and sweet, breaking the tense silence. Xinyue froze in the shadow of the corridor. That was wrong. That was new. Xinya continued, her voice dripping with filial piety. I cannot abandon my father in his hour of need. What is the title of a lady or the comfort of a fortress compared to the blood of one's own parent? My place is here. The Kong men swelled with pride. Junjie nodded approvingly. Junwei looked touched. Jiwon puffed out his chest. Their father's eyes grew moist. My true daughter, he murmured. Xinyue's mind raced. She remembers too. The calculation in Xinya's performance was obvious now. She wasn't choosing poverty, she was choosing the winning horse. In 3 years, their father would miraculously solve a crisis for the emperor and be promoted. Junjie would top the exams. Junwei's fortunes would explode. Jiwon would gain military glory. Xinya was securing her place at the heart of that coming storm, ensuring she would be the one to reap the ultimate reward, the crown prince's marriage proposal. A cold smile touched Xinyue's lips. So, her sister had also seen the future. And she thought to manipulate it again. Lady Suin's face fell, her hope for a companion crumbling. She looked past Xinya, her eyes finding Xinyue in the shadows. Xinyue? My child? All eyes turned to her. Xinya's gaze held a subtle challenge, a glint that said, the slow, sturdy ox will stay and plow the fields, as always. Kong Ziyuan spoke, his tone magnanimous. Xinyue, your sister has shown her loyalty. You may go with your mother. It will be a harder life, but perhaps it will teach you gratitude. The script from the past life. The dismissal. The condemnation to the harder life. Xinyue stepped into the light. She did not look at her father or brothers. She looked at Xinya, and she saw the future, not just the one she remembered, but the one her sister was trying to weave. She saw the cold mansion, the suspicious stepbrothers, the gruff grandmother, the austere life at the border fortress. A den of wolves, indeed. but a wolf fights its enemies openly. A viper strikes from the bosom of family. She walked to her mother and took her hand. It was trembling. She squeezed it, firm and sure. I choose to go with mother, she said, her voice calm, carrying across the silent room. Shock, then disdain, crossed her brothers' faces. Junwei snorted. Chasing a title after all, sister? We thought you had more spine. Xingyue met his eyes. I am not chasing a title, second brother. I am fleeing a nest of vipers who have already decided my blood is their fertilizer. She let her gaze sweep over Junjie, Juanhu, her father. You look at me and see a debt to be collected. A resource to be spent. General Morong's wolves may eat me, but at least they will not call it family duty while they pick their teeth with my bones. The vulgarity, the sheer audacity, struck them mute. Xinyao's mask of sweetness slipped for a heartbeat, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. Xingyue turned her back on them, on the Kong estate, on her past life. She looked at her mother. Let's go, mother. I hear the wind in Shieling is very cold. It will be bracing. As she crossed the threshold, she didn't look back. But she heard Xinya's voice, a hissed whisper meant only for her fading presence. You foolish girl. In 3 years, when our family rises and you're forgotten in that frozen fortress, you will weep at this choice. Xingyue didn't pause. Let them rise, she thought, the ghost of a steel wound aching in her soul. Let them climb their mountain of ambition. This time, I won't be the stone they step on. This time, I will be the avalanche waiting at the peak. The journey to the wolves had begun. The journey to Shieling took 10 days, each mile stretching the taut cord of memory in Xingyue's chest. The landscape shifted from the lush, manicured waterways around Luojiang to rugged foothills, and finally to the stark, breathtaking expanse of the high plains. The air grew thin and carried a bite, even in late spring. It smelled of pine, cold stone, and distant snowmelt. Her mother, Lady Suine, spent the first 3 days in quiet tears, then in resolute silence, and finally in a state of anxious preparation. General Morong is a good man, she repeated to Xingyue, as if convincing herself. A stern man, but just. He was a friend to my late brother. He does not offer marriage lightly. Xingyue listened, her eyes on the horizon where the jagged silhouette of Shieling Fortress began to emerge. It wasn't a palace. It was a statement hewn from mountain rock and ambition. A formidable, sprawling complex of gray stone walls, watchtowers, and sharp angles that seemed to defy the very clouds. No delicate eaves or ornamental gardens here. This was a place of function, of defense. Her new home. And his family? Xingyue asked quietly on the 9th day, as the fortress gates loomed. Lady Suine's hands twisted in her lap. His first wife, the lady of the fortress, died of a winter fever years ago. A loss from which they say he never truly recovered. He never remarried. There are 4 sons. The eldest, Morong Zhen, manages much of the military governance. The second, Morong Li, has unusual interests. The third, Morong Feng, oversees the fortress's trade and supplies. The youngest, Morong Lei, is a warrior through and through. She paused. And there is the dowager, the general's mother. She is the steel within the steel. No mention of warmth. Only roles, functions, and reputations. A den of wolves, Xingyue had called it. Now, she was walking into the mouth of the cave. Their arrival was met with minimal ceremony. A squadron of stone-faced guards in worn leather armor escorted their modest carriage through the massive iron-banded gates. The courtyard within was a bustle of organized chaos, soldiers drilling, blacksmiths hammering, servants hauling provisions, all with a focused, unsmiling efficiency. Eyes, curious and assessing, flicked toward them before snapping back to duty. They were led not to a grand receiving hall, but to a spacious, austere chamber warmed by a large fireplace. Tapestries depicted not flowers or birds, but maps and historic battle formations. The furniture was solid, dark wood, built for durability, not elegance. And there, standing before the fire, was the pack. General Morongqing was the first impression of a cliff face broad, weathered, and immovable. His hair was shot with gray, his beard trimmed close. His eyes, when they settled on Lady Suine, held a cautious kindness, but when they shifted to Xingyue, they were the assessing gray of storm clouds. He gave a short, sharp nod. Lady Suine. Miss Kong. To his right stood a young man who could only be Morong Zhen. He was tall, with his father's breadth of shoulder but a leaner, sharper build. His face was all clean, severe lines a strategist's face. He held himself with a stillness that felt more dangerous than any movement. His gaze swept over Xinyue like a scout surveying unfamiliar terrain, finding neither threat nor value, only noting her presence as a variable. He did not speak. Beside him, practically vibrating with antagonism, was Morong Lei. Younger, maybe Xinyue's age, with a fiery intensity in his eyes. He looked her up and down with unconcealed contempt, his lip curling as if he smelled something foul. This was the open hostility she'd expected. Leaning against a table, examining a ledger with casual disinterest, was Morong Fong. He had a merchant's shrewd eyes and a slight, knowing smirk. His clothes were finer than the others, a touch of dark silk at the collar. He observed the scene as if it were a mildly entertaining market transaction. And in the corner, shrouded in shadow, was Morong Lei. He was the palest of them, his features fine and strangely detached. His eyes, a light, unsettling gray, were fixed on Xinyue not with hostility, but with a clinical, anatomical interest. He didn't move, simply watched, and the silence around him felt colder than the stone walls. It was the woman seated in the central chair who broke the tension. Dowager Lady Morong was small, wizened like a winter apple, her back straight as a spear. Her hair was a crown of pure white, her hands, resting on a simple cane, were knotted with strength, not weakness. Her eyes, black and bright as obsidian, pinned Xinyue where she stood. So, the dowager's voice was like grinding stone, this is the girl who chose the wolves. The statement hung in the air. Morong Lei snorted. Morongjin's expression didn't change. Xinyue released her mother's hand and took the 3 prescribed steps forward. She knelt, not in the flowing, graceful motion of a Luojiang lady, but in a firm, deliberate descent, and kowtowed, her forehead touching the cool stone floor. This unworthy one is Kong Xinyue. I thank the general for his shelter and the dowager for her audience. She rose, meeting the old woman's gaze. She would not simper. She would not cower. She had crawled enough in her past life. The dowager's eyes narrowed, then crinkled at the corners. A faint, almost imperceptible thing. Humph. You kneel like you're planting a flag. Get up. Let me look at you. Xinyue stood. The dowager's scrutiny was physical. Skinny, she pronounced. City-bred. Soft hands, but calluses here, she pointed with her cane at the space between Xinyue's thumb and forefinger. From writing? Or from labor? From grinding ink, my lady, Xinyue answered honestly. And from sewing. And, at times, from scrubbing floors. She saw Morong Lei roll his eyes at the mention of menial work. Useful, the dowager grunted, though it wasn't clear if it was a compliment. We have little use for decorative blossoms here that wilt at the first frost. Can you read? Yes, my lady. Write? Yes. Numbers? Adequately. Can you ride? Xinyue hesitated. I have sat on a pony, my lady. I cannot ride. A chuckle came from Morong Fong. A pony, he murmured, amused. The dowager ignored him. Can you shoot a bow? No, my lady. Do you faint at the sight of blood? Xinyue thought of the ceremonial dagger sinking into her gut, the warm flood of her own life. No, my lady. That gave the dowager a longer pause. Her black eyes bored into Xinyue's, looking for the lie, finding only a flat, dark truth. Good, she said finally. We'll start with the reading. Zhen. Morongjin straightened almost imperceptibly. Grandmother. The girl will need tutoring. She enters Jade Dragon Academy in a fortnight. You will see she is prepared. And you will escort her on her first day. A muscle ticked in Morongjin's jaw. It was the first crack in his icy composure. Grandmother, my duties at the garrison will keep for an hour, the dowager finished, her tone brooking no argument. She is under this roof now. Her failures will be our failures. Her ignorance will reflect on us. See it done. It was a decree. Morongjin's eyes flicked to Xinyue, and in that glance, she saw it clearly, she was not a sister, not a guest. She was a duty. An inconvenient, imposed duty. He gave a stiff, single nod. As you command. The audience was clearly over. As Lady Suine was led away by the general to discuss domestic arrangements, the brothers dispersed with silent efficiency. Morongli glided from the shadows and past Xinyue, pausing just long enough to say, in a soft, detached voice, a fascinating skeletal structure. Very resilient. Do try not to damage it before I have a chance to study it properly. He was gone before the chill of his words had settled. Morongfeng offered a shallow, mocking bow. Welcome to the pride, little sister. Try not to get eaten on your first day. He sauntered out, ledger in hand. Morongli was the last. He stopped in front of her, his presence hot and aggressive. I don't know what game you and your mother are playing, he hissed, low enough that only she could hear. But this is not a Kong merchant stall where you can haggle and cheat. This is a fortress. We survive by strength and loyalty. You have neither. Stay out of my way. He shouldered past her, leaving her alone in the vast, tapestried room with the dowager. The old woman hadn't moved. She was watching Xinyue again, that same unreadable expression on her face. He has a point, you know, the dowager said. Why are you here, Kong Xinyue? Truly? Xinyue looked at the ancient, stern face. She could lie. She could weave a tale of filial devotion to her mother. But this woman, she sensed, would smell a lie like rot. Because the place I left, Xinyue said, her voice low but clear in the silent room, was a beautifully painted cage where they were ready to sacrifice the bird to improve the view. I would rather take my chances with the wolves. At least wolves are honest about their teeth. A long, heavy silence followed. Then, the dowager did something extraordinary. She laughed. It was a short, dry sound, like rocks tumbling. Honest about their teeth. I like that. She leaned forward on her cane. Very well. You've entered the wolf den. Now, let's see if you can learn to howl. She gestured with her cane toward a maid who had appeared silently at the door. Auntie Tao will show you to your quarters. Rest. Tomorrow, your lessons begin. And girl, she added as Xinyue turned to leave. Yes, my lady? The gold bracelets my foolish son gave you as a welcome gift. Why aren't you wearing them? Xinyue was taken aback. How had she even noticed? In her past life, Xinyue had complained the dowager was stingy, preferring jade. They are very fine, my lady. I was afraid of losing them. The dowager's gaze was piercing. Lose them? Or find them vulgar? Xinyue's words, thrown in her face. Xinyue held her ground. I find them generous. And heavy. I am not yet used to the weight of such generosity. The dowager stared for another long moment, then waved her off. Go. The room she was given was small, clean, and faced the inner training yards. It held a bed, a desk, a chest, and a wash basin. No frills. Through the window, she could hear the rhythmic clash of practice swords and the guttural shouts of drills. The sound was foreign, jarring. Yet, as she sat on the edge of the hard bed, she felt not despair, but a grim, steadying clarity. The Kong family's cruelty had been wrapped in the pretty paper of family and duty. Here, the lines were stark. Morongzhen's cold duty. Morongli's open hatred. Morongfeng's amused indifference. Morongli's morbid curiosity. And the dowager's challenging assessment. There were no hidden knives here. Only visible ones. And for the first time since her rebirth, Kong Xinyue felt she could see the battlefield. She was outmatched, outnumbered, and in hostile territory. But she was, finally, awake. And a waking prey has a chance to learn the hunter's patterns, to find the weaknesses in the pack. She looked out at the gathering dusk over the fortress, at the torches being lit along the grim walls. Somewhere out there, her blood family was plotting their rise, with Xinyue as their jewel. Let them plot, Xinyue thought, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. I am no longer the stone beneath their feet. I am the flint, newly brought to the forge. Let's see what sparks fly when I am struck. The first lesson would come tomorrow. And she would be ready. The first week at Xiling was a study in controlled turbulence. Life in the Morong fortress moved to the rhythm of drums and bells, the watch change, the drill call, the meal hall. It was a stark, utilitarian symphony. Xinyue's mother, Lady Suine, navigated her new role as the general's wife with quiet grace, focusing on domestic management, a sphere where her Luojiang elegance found some purchase. Xinyue, however, was thrown into the deep, icy waters of Morong education. Her tutor was a retired garrison clerk with a face like a dried plum and breath that smelled of old ink and bitterness. He had no interest in poetry or the classics of harmony. He drilled her on logistics, basic fortification geometry, and the stark, unadorned histories of border conflicts. A lady in Shieling, he droned, should know why a wall is built 10 feet thick, not how to paint a 10-foot scroll. Meanwhile, Morongjian kept his word with glacial efficiency. For 1 hour each afternoon, he oversaw her preparation for Jade Dragon Academy. It was less tutoring and more a military inspection. He would stand by the window of the small study, his gaze fixed on the training yards below, while she read aloud from foundational texts. Louder, he would say, not looking at her. If you cannot command a room with your voice, you cannot command attention with your ideas. Or, stop pausing there. The argument flows through the comma, it does not die at it. He never offered praise, only correction. His presence was a cold pressure in the room, a constant reminder that she was an imposition. Yet, Xing Yue found a perverse focus in it. His disdain was clean, sharp. It didn't carry the toxic, familial betrayal of Junjia's criticisms. She swallowed her pride, amplified her voice, and smoothed her cadence. She was learning to survive in his climate. The day before her academy debut, the dowager summoned her. She was in her personal courtyard, a surprisingly sunny spot where she was directing an old servant in the repotting of a gnarled, militant-looking pine. Jade Dragon, the dowager said without preamble, plunging a trowel into the dirt. Full of preening pheasants and fox cubs playing at scholarship. You will be behind. You will be mocked. The Kong name carries no weight here, and the Morong name carries a different kind of weight, one that will make them either fear you or target you. She looked up, her eyes sharp. Which do you think? Xing Yue considered. They will target me, my lady. To prove they are not afraid. A grunt of approval. Correct. So. You have 2 choices. Crumple, and be forgotten. Or find your own teeth on the first day. I don't care about their poetry contests. I care that you don't come back sniveling. It was as close to a pep talk as Xing Yue would get. She bowed. I will not snivel, my lady. Jade Dragon Academy was a shock to the system. After the austere grey of Shieling, the academy was a cascade of vibrant silks, polished wood, and the murmur of cultivated voices. It sprawled amidst manicured lakes and artfully wild groves, an ode to scholarly refinement. Students glided along pathways, their robes each cut and color denoting family rank and scholarly achievement, a fluttering garden of social hierarchy. Morongjian, clad in a simple but exquisitely tailored dark blue robe that screamed military austerity, walked beside her. His pace was a swift march. She had to take 2 steps for every one of his. He offered no commentary, no reassurance. He was a deliverman, depositing a package. Eyes followed them. Whispers coiled like smoke. Is that a Morong? The eldest son. What's he doing here? Who's the girl? So plain, a Kong? From Luojiang? The ones who, the whispers died as Morongjian's gaze, flat and sweeping, passed over the clusters of students. He delivered her to the registrar's office, gave a curt nod to the astonished official, and then turned to leave. He paused, just for a second, his eyes meeting hers. Do not, he said, his voice low, embarrass the general's house. And he was gone, leaving her alone in the gilded, terrifying hive. Her first class was literature of the northern dynasties. The Kong siblings were there. Junjia, looking every inch the rising literary star, sat at the front. Junwei was near the back, already sketching trade routes on his slate. Xinyao was in the center, a pale, lovely flower surrounded by admirers. Their eyes met Xinyue's. Junjia's held cold dismissal. Junwei's, calculation. Xinyao's flickered with something complex, pity, triumph, and a flicker of deep-seated anxiety. The professor, an elderly man with a wispy beard, began a lecture on metaphorical resonance in wartime elegies. Xinyue's mind, trained for a week on supply lines and wall thicknesses, reeled. The illusion soared over her head. When the professor called for an interpretation of a couplet, a boy with a supercilious smile pointed at her. Perhaps our new student from the martial north has a fresh perspective? One unburdened by traditional scholarship? The class tittered. Xinyao looked down, a faint smile on her lips. Xinyue's face heated, but she heard the dowager's voice, find your own teeth. She stood. The poem laments the fallen of the Battle of Red Gorge, sir, she said, her voice clear, thanks to Morongzhin's drills. It speaks of jade-shattered, blood-watering barren fields. My perspective is this: the general who wrote it lost because his supply train was too long, vulnerable to cavalry raids from the Western Pass mentioned 2 stanzas earlier. He was a better poet than a strategist. A stunned silence fell. Then, a burst of laughter. The professor looked affronted. Junjie closed his eyes in pained embarrassment. She had reduced sublime tragedy to logistics. But a burly boy from a known military family grinned. She's got a point. My grandfather always said that poets starved his own men. The tension broke into debate: traditionalists versus pragmatists. Xinyue had, in her clumsy way, made a mark. Not a graceful one, but a mark. She sat down, her heart pounding. She had not crumbled. The pattern repeated. In calligraphy, her characters were sturdy, functional, but lacked the flowing artistry of her peers. She was placed at the bottom of the rankings posted that afternoon. In history, she knew the dates and outcomes of battles no one else cared about, but fumbled the names of influential court poets. By day's end, she was exhausted, a dull ache of humiliation and stubborn pride settled in her bones. As she gathered her things, she overheard Junwei talking to a group of merchant sons by the lotus pond. Utter waste of a seat. My sister Xinya could compose an ode that would make you weep, while the other one calculates the cost of the ink. The laughter was sharp. Xinyue turned to leave, walking quickly toward the main gate where a fortress cart was to collect her. Her path took her past the open pavilions of the academy's leisure quarter. There, she saw Morong Lei. He was surrounded by his own pack sons of garrison officers and minor military nobles. They were loud, boisterous, drinking from small ceramic jars, their academy robes worn with a deliberate sloppiness. Morong Lei was holding court, reenacting a wrestling move, his laugh ringing out, bold and unapologetic. And then she saw something else. 2 men, dressed in the plain gray of academy servants, were loitering near a pillar of the Pavilion of 1,000 Delights, a popular spot for students to buy sweets and tea. But their eyes weren't on the steaming pots or honey cakes. Their eyes were tracking Morong Lei. Their posture was all wrong for servants: too still, too coiled. One brushed back his sleeve, and Xinyue caught a glimpse of a dark, intricate tattoo on his forearm: a coiling serpent. Her breath hitched. She'd seen that mark before. In her past life. Juanhu, in a drunken boast after his military promotion, had shown off a dagger taken from a defeated rival faction. The hilt had been engraved with that exact serpent. The Viper's Nest, he'd called them. Assassins for hire from the western marches. Nasty business. A cold, clear understanding slotted into place. This wasn't an accident. This was a targeted strike. The Vipers were here, in the heart of the peaceful academy, and their target was the youngest son of General Morong. An assassination here would be a devastating blow, a message written in noble blood. Her mind raced. She couldn't run to the academy guards: she'd look hysterical, and the Vipers would melt away. She couldn't warn Morong Lei directly: he'd never believe her, might even think it a trick. She needed chaos. Immediate, undeniable, distracting chaos. Her eyes swept the scene. The pavilion vendor shouting about his 8 treasure tea. A group of young ladies releasing captured butterflies from a silk pouch for good luck. Morong Lei's friend pretending to be a bull, charging another boy. Think, Xinyue. You're not a scholar. You're not a warrior. You're the girl who survived a family of vipers by being too useful to discard. Be useful now. An idea, desperate and ridiculous, formed. She walked briskly to the tea stall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She fumbled in her pouch and pulled out a few coins, her meager allowance from the dowager. Vendor, she called, her voice pitched high with a false, girlish excitement. Your finest tea. A whole pot. For that handsome young master over there. She pointed dramatically, not at Morong Lei, but at the largest, most belligerent-looking of his friends. The vendor and the students nearby stared. Morong Lei's group turned, confused. Before anyone could react, Xinyue grabbed the freshly filled, scalding hot pottery teapot from the vendor's bench. For your bravery, sir, she cried, and with a clumsy, exaggerated motion, she pretended to trip on the hem of her own robe. The teapot flew from her hands. It didn't sail toward the intended target. It sailed in a high, steaming arc directly toward the cluster of young ladies and their precious, fluttering butterflies. Screams erupted. The pot shattered on the stone edge of a planter, spraying boiling tea in shards. The ladies shrieked, scrambling back. The butterflies, startled, became a chaotic cloud of color. One of Moronlay's friends, the bull, startled by the screams, stumbled sideways into a low table piled with delicate honey cakes, sending them flying. In the instant of perfect, undirected chaos, the screams, the steam, the fluttering insects, the splattered cakes, Shinua's eyes shot to the grey-clad men. They were startled, their focus on Moronlay broken. One took a step forward, hand going to his waist, but his partner grabbed his arm, shaking his head sharply. The moment was gone. Moronlay was now facing the commotion, his back no longer exposed. His friends were forming a rough, protective circle, laughing at the absurdity of it all. "Who let the madwoman loose?" someone shouted. "My butterflies. You dreadful girl." Shinua stood in the middle of the havoc, her robe splattered with tea, her face a mask of feigned, mortified horror. She looked like exactly what they all thought she was, a clumsy, uncouth country mouse who'd caused a scene. Moronlay pushed through the crowd, his face dark with anger. He saw her. "You," he spat. "Of course. Can't even walk through a garden without starting a war. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown out of the academy gates." She didn't wait to be told twice. She ducked her head, mumbled an incoherent apology, and fled, not toward the main gate, but down a side path, her body trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline-fueled relief. She heard no sounds of struggle, no cries of alarm behind her. Only the fading sounds of outrage and cleanup. When the fortress cart rattled through the gates of Shieling later, she was composed, her stained robe the only evidence of the day's disaster. The dowager was waiting in the main courtyard, her keen eyes missing nothing. "Well? Did you snivel?" "No, my lady." "Did you find your teeth?" Shinua thought of the serpent tattoo, the diverted teapot, the unseen blade that never found its mark. "I bit the only thing I could reach," she said, which was true in a way. The dowager's eyes narrowed, studying the tea stains, the subtle shake in her hands that Shinua couldn't quite suppress. "Humph. Looks like you got bitten back. Go clean up. You stink of fear and jasmine tea." That night, as Shinua lay in bed, the echoes of the day played behind her eyes. The scornful laughter, the cold rankings, Shinya's pitying glance. But overlaid on it was the image of the two grey-clad men, fading into the shadows, their mission foiled by a spilled pot of tea and a cloud of butterflies. She had saved Moronlay's life. And he would forever think of her as the idiot who ruined his afternoon. A strange, hollow laugh bubbled in her chest. This was her new life. Not a heroine, but a catalyst for chaotic, unintended salvation. It was not glorious. But it was, she realized, a form of power. The power of the unexpected variable. In the dark, she whispered to herself, "Welcome to the wolf den, Kong Shinua. Today, you held." It just sounded like a scream to everyone else. The morning after the academy debacle, Shinua was summoned to the dowager's private chambers at dawn. She expected censure, perhaps a final dismissal for embarrassing the household. Instead, she found the old lady breaking her fast with a bowl of congee so plain it looked like plaster. "Sit," the dowager commanded, not looking up. "Auntie Tao says your robe is ruined. Tea stains. Butterfly wing dust." A grunt that might have been a laugh. "An expensive pot, I hear." Shinua's stomach tightened. "I will repay the cost, my lady. From my allowance." "With what? The coppers I give you to buy hairpins?" The dowager finally looked at her, those obsidian eyes missing nothing. "The vendor was compensated. By my order. Now. Tell me why you really did it." The directness was a blade to the throat. Shinua could cling to the story of clumsiness. But the dowager had seen something that calculated panic, perhaps. She chose a sliver of truth. "I saw men. By the pavilion. They didn't look like servants. They were watching fourth young Master Lei. I recognized a marking. From stories my third brother told. It was a faction known for hired blades." She braced for disbelief, for accusations of fancy or hysteria. The dowager stirred her congee slowly. "The serpent's kiss mark. From the western marches. Vipers." She said it as casually as discussing the weather. General Morong has been rooting out their influence from the border trade routes. They would find a public strike appealing. She took a sip, her gaze steady on Xingyue. So you threw a teapot. It was the only disruption I could create quickly. And you didn't think to call the guards? They would have vanished. And no one would have believed me. A long silence. Then, a nod. Practical. Ugly, but practical. The dowager set down her bowl. Lei thinks you're a fool. Zhen thinks you're a disruptive burden. Let them. A hidden knife is more useful than a polished one on display. But remember, girl, next time, find a less expensive weapon. Now, about this academy ranking. Xinyue's cheeks burned. I was last, my lady. Obviously. You were taught to keep accounts, not write love letters. That changes. The dowager gestured to a side table, where two objects lay. One was a pair of heavy, beautifully wrought gold bracelets, the welcome gift from General Morong. The other was a simple, elegant box of white jade. My son gave you gold. I find gold, loud. Here. Xinyue opened the jade box. Inside, on a bed of dark silk, lay an inkstone. It was not large, but the stone was a deep, river black, shot through with fine, hair-like veins of silver. It was the most exquisite thing she had ever touched. A scholar's treasure. This, the dowager said, is for grinding your own ink. For writing your own words. Not the pretty, empty words of the academy, but the words you need to survive. Use it. The gift was so profoundly thoughtful, so utterly different from the transactional kindness of her blood family, that Xinyue's throat closed. She could only bow deeply, the inkstone cool and heavy in her hands. The birthday, the dowager continued, as if bestowing treasures was an everyday affair. In 2 weeks. I expect you to contribute. Not with your mother's money. With something from you. Figure it out. It was a dismissal and a challenge in one. Figuring it out was a quandary. She had no money for lavish gifts. Her skills were domestic and logistical, not artistic. As she pondered, mending a torn practice robe in the sunlit courtyard, Morong Lei stormed past, his face like thunder. Stupid, useless tradition, he muttered, kicking a pebble that ricocheted off a wall. Fourth young master? Xinyue ventured cautiously. He glared at her. Grandmother's birthday. Everyone expects some grand, filial display. Feng will give some obscenely expensive imported curio. Li will probably give her a preserved scorpion. Zhen will present a perfectly analyzed border report. And he threw his hands up, I have to come up with something that isn't just look how strong I am with a spear. An idea, fragile and ridiculous, sprouted in Xinyue's mind. What if, you didn't give a thing, but an act? He stopped. What? A performance. Something lively. Something that shows spirit, not just wealth or preserved insects. He eyed her with deep suspicion. Like what? Juggling? Like a lion dance, Xinyue said, the words coming out before she could stop them. She'd seen them at Luojiang festivals, chaotic, joyful, demanding strength and coordination. Morong Lei stared at her as if she'd suggested he fly. A lion dance? At a formal birthday banquet? That's peasant festival stuff. Is it? Xinyue pressed, a spark of her old, negotiating self breaking through. Or is it raw energy, skill, and celebration? The dowager values strength and authenticity. What is more authentic than the dance that chases away evil spirits and brings good fortune? You have the strength. You have the rhythm from your drills. You just need a partner for the back legs, and a banner. A painted backdrop to tell a story. He was silent, thinking. The insult of peasant festival warred with the appeal of an active, martial solution. A partner? Who? None of my brothers would debase themselves. I could paint the banner, Xinyue offered quickly. I'm not a master, but I can paint characters. We could inscribe it with a birthday blessing, fortress of years, heart of steel. Something like that. You? He snorted, but the outrage was fading, replaced by calculation. And what do you get out of this? A chance to finally ingratiate yourself? Xinyue met his gaze. I get to contribute to the dowager's birthday without embarrassing myself with a cheap trinket. and you get to give a gift no one else will. We both win. A slow, grudging smile spread across Moronlay's face. It was the first expression she'd seen on him that wasn't anger or contempt. It was the smile of a conspirator. Fine. But if you paint one wobbly character, I'm feeding you to the lion's head. The following days took on a strange, dual rhythm. Mornings were still for brutal academy catch-up and Moronjin's silent, critical presence. Afternoons, however, became a secret project. They commandeered an unused storeroom. Moronlay, with startling efficiency, sourced a vibrant, slightly battered lion costume from the fortress's own theater troupe used for New Year celebrations. He began to practice the movements, the powerful, leonine sweeps and shakes, transforming his martial prowess into something playful and powerful. Xinyue, meanwhile, scavenged. She found a large roll of durable canvas used for patching tents. She mixed pigments from the kitchen, beetroot for red, charcoal for black, turmeric for yellow, and from the forge, ground minerals for green and blue. Using a wide brush and all the steady-handed control she'd learned from years of careful embroidery, she began to paint. Not flowers, but the bold, blocky characters of the fortress's motto, intertwining them with simplistic but strong depictions of mountain peaks and a soaring eagle, the Morong symbol. It was not beautiful in the classical sense. It was bold. It looked, she thought with a pang, like something that belonged here. Moronlay would pause his pantomime, sweating and grinning, to critique her work. The eagle's beak is crooked. It looks like it has a broken nose. It's stylized. It's ugly. It has character. They bickered, but it was a clean bickering, devoid of the poisonous subtext of her past life. He was an arrogant, blunt instrument. She was a stubborn, practical scribe. They were, improbably, a team. The news of the dowager's birthday spread, and as expected, the Kong family secured an invitation. Xinya's status as the loyal daughter of the rising Kong official made her an object of curiosity. On the day of the banquet, the Morong manor was filled with a different kind of bustle. Officers in formal dress, neighboring landowners, and officials from the provincial capital mingled in the great hall, their eyes curious about the new Lady Morong and her daughter. The Kong family arrived like a painted tableau. Kong Ziyuan, already playing the part of the promising statesman. Junjia, aloof and scholarly. Junwei, flashing a merchant's easy smile. Juanhu, walking with a slight, new swagger. And Xinya, a vision in pale lilac and silver, her beauty delicate and out of place among the stone and leather. Their gift was presented first, a calculated move for attention. It was a large, polished inkstone screen depicting a serene landscape of the Luojiang waterways, crafted from rare green slate. It was tasteful, expensive, and spoke of a world far from Xiling. A humble token, Kong Ziyuan said, bowing, wishing the esteemed dowager tranquility and the gentle peace of flowing water. The guests murmured appreciation. It was a scholar's gift, a courtier's gift. The dowager received it with a polite nod. You have spent too much. Thank you. It was a clear dismissal. The Kong family's smiles tightened. Other gifts followed, bolts of fine silk, a ceremonial sword from a neighboring general, a rare medicinal ginseng root. Then, Morong Fong presented a delicate clockwork songbird from the far south, which trilled a tinny melody. Moronly gave a perfectly preserved fossil of a fern, noting its elegant structural similarity to certain defensive formations. Morongjin presented a concise, devastatingly accurate report on the pacification of western bandit tribes. Then, the dowager looked around. Where is my youngest grandson? And the Kong girl? A ripple of curiosity. Moronlay and Xinyue were conspicuously absent. Just then, the drums started. Not the gentle tap of banquet music, but the deep, resonant boom-boom of festival drums from the courtyard. All heads turned to the doors, which were thrown open. There, in the twilight, was the lion. Gold and red, vibrant and slightly ridiculous. Moronlay's legs, powerful and sure, propelled the front. One of his burly friends, grinning wildly, manned the back. They leaped and shook, the lion's head weaving with a life of its own, eyes blinking. And behind them, held aloft by two fortress guards, was Xinyue's banner. It was huge, crude, and brilliant. The character's fortress of years, heart of steel, stood out in stark, brave strokes. The crooked-beaked eagle soared over the clumsy mountains. It was so utterly, gloriously not what anyone expected. A shocked silence held for a moment, then broke into laughter, not mocking, but delighted, surprised laughter. The martial guests roared with approval. The scholars looked bewildered but amused. The lion pranced right up to the dowager's seat, bowed its great head, and then, with a final shake, the dancers emerged, sweating and beaming. Moronlay dropped to one knee. "Grandmother! We bring you noise, joy, and a banner painted by a stubborn artist with a heavy hand. May your years be as fierce and lively as this lion." The dowager stared. She looked at the panting boys, at the vibrant, ugly, heartfelt banner. She looked at Xingyue, who stood to the side, her hands clasped, her face flushed with exertion and anxiety. Then, the dowager did something no one in the hall had ever seen. She threw back her head and laughed, a full, rich, booming laugh that echoed off the stone walls. "Now that is a gift," she declared, slapping her knee. "It has spirit. It has sweat. It's hideous. I love it. Bring it here." As the banner was presented, Xingya, who had been preparing to perform a delicate, court-approved flute melody, stood frozen, her instrument forgotten. Her father's expensive screen suddenly looked like what it was, a calculated, cold transaction. The dowager's eyes found Xingya. "And you, Kong Xingya. I hear you are talented. Would you like to perform?" It was a courtesy, but in the wake of the lion's raw energy, it felt like an afterthought. Xingya's performance, when she gave it, was technically flawless, ethereally beautiful. And it died in the air, utterly overshadowed by the memory of thundering drums and a laughing old woman. Later, as the banquet wound down, the dowager called Xingyue over. She gestured to the banner, now leaning proudly against a wall. "You painted the characters." "Yes, my lady. They are sturdy. Like fortress walls." A pause. "My son gave you gold. I gave you an inkstone. Today, you gave me something that couldn't be bought. Remember that." As Xingyue walked back to her room, she passed the Kong family leaving early, their faces stiff with defeat. Junjie didn't look at her. Junwei's smile was a grimace. Xinya's eyes held a venom so pure it was almost familiar. But the taste in Xingyue's mouth wasn't bitterness. It was the sharp, clean flavor of canvas and pigment, of drumbeats and shared effort. She had not bought favor. She had, in her small, chaotic way, built something. And for the first time, the austere stones of Shieling Fortress felt less like a prison, and more like a canvas. A harsh, demanding, magnificent canvas. The success of the lion dance created a subtle but perceptible shift in Xinyue's standing within the fortress. The dowager's booming laugh seemed to have echoed through the stone corridors, granting her a strange, provisional acceptance. She was no longer just the inconvenient girl from Luojiang, she was the one who had orchestrated the hideous banner and noisy lion that pleased the fortress's formidable matriarch. Moronlay still treated her with brusque familiarity, but the contempt had been sanded down into something resembling rough-edged tolerance. He'd even gruffly complimented her banner's sturdy lines before adding, "Still ugly, though." The real change, however, was in her relationship with the academy. News of the dowager's birthday spectacle had spread, filtered through the gossip of servants and guards. The other students at Jade Dragon now looked at her with a mixture of wary confusion and morbid curiosity. She was the girl who painted with beet juice and made generals laugh. She was an anomaly, and anomalies were either ostracized or fascinating. This fragile new equilibrium was about to be tested. The Garden Festival, the grandest event of the spring season in Jiangzhou, was approaching. For the academy, it was more than a celebration, it was a battlefield of reputation. The festival grounds would be packed with nobility, merchants, scholars, and officials. Student works would be displayed, poetry contests held, and martial tournaments would draw the province's best young fighters. For Xinyue, it represented something else entirely, her first real test in the Murong world beyond its walls, and a critical juncture in her silent war with the Kong family. The Morong family's breakfast hall was a scene of quiet planning. Morongjin reviewed security arrangements for the family's pavilion with a captain. Morong Feng discussed the shipment of specialty goods for their concession stand. Morong Lei was vibrating with anticipation for the martial tournament. Morong Li, in his corner, was sketching what looked like the skeletal structure of a festival tent. The dowager tapped her cane on the stone floor. "The festival lasts a month. It is a time for display. For our house, that means strength, order, and profit." Her eyes swept over them, landing on Xinyue. "You will attend with your brothers. You will observe. You will learn what it means to represent this fortress beyond its walls." Yes, my lady, Xingyue murmured, her mind already racing. To simply observe was to be passive, a decoration. After the lion dance, she couldn't go back to being wallpaper. Later, in the courtyard, she found Morong Lei practicing his spear forms with brutal efficiency. The tournament is the first week, he said between thrusts, not looking at her. I'm going to wipe the floor with every pampered lordling from here to the capital. Confidence is good, Xingyue said carefully, leaning against a practice dummy. But have you considered the secondary objective? He stopped, spear point quivering in the air. What secondary objective? Winning is the objective. Winning the fight is one thing. Winning the crowd, the sponsors, the future patrons, that's another. She'd seen this in her past life with Jianhu. He'd won his bout but lost a potential sponsor by breaking his opponent's arm with unnecessary force. The festival is a marketplace. You're not just selling your skill, you're selling the idea of Morong's strength. Controlled, invincible, honorable strength. Morong Lei stared at her, his brow furrowed. Since when do you know about selling things? Since I was born into a merchant's house, she said dryly. Just a thought. Flashy wins against weak opponents mean little. A difficult, clean win against a respected rival? That tells a story everyone will buy. He grunted, considering. Humph. Maybe there's a brain under all that city hair after all. He resumed his practice, but his movements seemed more deliberate, less wildly aggressive. Next, she approached Morong Feng, who was in his study surrounded by ledgers and samples of cloth and spices. Third young master, she began. Come to ask for festival spending money, he said without looking up, a smirk playing on his lips. I suppose a few coppers for hair ribbons wouldn't break the treasury. Actually, Xingyue said, stepping closer to his desk, I came to ask about your surplus. That got his attention. His pen stilled. My surplus? The fortress imports in bulk. There must be items that are slightly flawed, out of season, or simply overstocked. Damaged bolts of cloth, spices that are too common for your high-end clients, last year's ledger books. Morong Feng leaned back, his merchant's eyes sharpening. And what would a well-bred young lady want with my commercial refuse? I want to make you more money with it. He laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. Oh, this is rich. Go on. Enlighten me. The festival is full of people with modest coin to spend: students, guards, servants, minor craftsmen. They can't afford your fine silks or rare incense. But they want to participate. They want a bit of luck, a bit of fun, a souvenir. She took a deep breath, laying out the plan that had been forming in her mind. We take your surplus items, the slightly torn cloth, the common cinnamon sticks, the outdated ledgers, and we bundle them into mystery boxes. We sell them for a fixed, low price. The buyer doesn't know if they're getting a scrap of silk worth little or a silver coin we've hidden in one of 100 boxes. It's a gamble. It's entertainment. And it turns your waste into pure profit. Morong Feng was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of intense calculation. A lottery of trash, he mused. The thrill of chance, the profit margin would be exceptional. The damaged goods are written off already. Any return is pure silver. He looked at her, a new respect in his gaze. You want to run this stall? I want to help fourth young master run it, Xingyue corrected. He provides the muscle and draws a crowd. I manage the numbers and the presentation. She wouldn't overreach. This had to be a partnership within the family structure. A slow smile spread across Morong Feng's face. Little sister, he said, and the term held less mockery this time, I believe we have a deal. I'll have the surplus delivered to a storage tent. You and Lei can sort through the refuse. The first day of the garden festival was a sensory avalanche. The air, usually crisp with mountain wind, was thick with the smells of roasting meats, frying dough, exotic perfumes, and the dusty scent of crowded humanity. Pavilions in every color of silk lined the sprawling grounds, from the austere displays of scholarly academies to the opulent, perfumed tents of great merchant houses. The Morong Pavilion stood apart, larger, sturdier, flying a banner with that same crooked-beaked eagle. Xingyue and Morong Lei's mystery stall was set up at a busy intersection nearby. They'd draped the slightly flawed silks as backdrops. Morong Lei, in a simple guard's tunic that showed off his build, stood front and center, holding aloft one of their wooden mystery boxes. Test your fortune, he bellowed, his parade ground voice cutting through the din. 8 coppers for a chance at silk, spice, or silver. The gods decide your prize. It was crude. It was loud. It was irresistible. A crowd gathered, drawn by the spectacle of a Murong son hawking wares and the tantalizing promise of hidden treasure. Xingyue, positioned at a small table with a locked coin box and a tally sheet, managed the flow. 1 box per customer. Pay here. Good luck. The first hour was a whirlwind of excited hands, the rustle of paper, and gasps of delight or groans of mock dismay. A kitchen maid squealed with joy upon finding a small, flawed but still beautiful porcelain cup. A guardsman laughed when he unwrapped a single, potent clove of garlic. The randomness was the game. Xingyue kept her head down, counting coins, making change, her mind tracking the numbers. The profit was already substantial. Murong Lei, to her surprise, was a natural showman, bantering with customers, magnifying the small wins into epic tales. Then, the air around the stall chilled. Step aside. Make way. The crowd parted like grass before a scythe. There stood the Kong siblings. Junjie looked disdainful. Junwei's face was a mask of cold calculation. Juanhu swaggered, still favoring the leg he'd supposedly injured. And Xinya, a vision in watery blue silk, looked upon the stall with an expression of profound pity. Well, Junwei said, his voice carrying. If it isn't our sister, reduced to peddling, what is this? Commercial scrap? Murong Lei's grin vanished, replaced by a warrior's flat stare. You have a problem with our business, merchant? It's not the business, it's the degradation, Junjie intoned. A woman of a scholarly household, haggling like a market fishwife. It's unseemly. Xinya fluttered forward, her voice a gentle poison. Sister, please. Must you do this? If you needed coin, we could have assisted. This is so undignified. She turned her luminous eyes on the gathered crowd. My sister has always been practical. Forgive her. Xingyue felt the old, familiar heat of humiliation rise in her chest. But alongside it now burned a new, colder fire. She stood up from her table. Practicality feeds garrisons, sister, Xingyue said, her voice clear and steady, carrying the tone Morongzhen had drilled into her. Dignity doesn't mend torn cloaks or fill empty bellies. We are not selling dreams of elegance here. We are selling a fair chance. Something everyone here can understand. She gestured to the maid still clutching her porcelain cup, to the guardsman laughing with his garlic. The crowd, most of them commoners or low-ranking soldiers, murmured in agreement. Junwei's eyes narrowed. A fair chance? With goods of unknown origin? How do we know you're not smuggling contraband? Salt, perhaps? Selling salt without a royal license is a serious crime. A ripple of unease went through the onlookers. The accusation was dangerous. Murong Lei stepped forward, his hand dropping to where a knife would normally be. You dare accuse a Murong of smuggling? Not a Murong, Junwei said smoothly. Her family has a history of cutting corners. Before the tension could snap, a new voice cut through, cool and precise as a surgeon's blade. Is there an issue here? Morongzhen emerged from the direction of the family pavilion. He wasn't in festival finery, but in his usual dark blue, his presence an immediate anchor of authority. His eyes swept over the Kong siblings, then to Xingyue and the stall. Junwei offered a shallow bow. Young Master Murong. A mere concern for propriety and legality. My sister's enterprise seems unlicensed. Morongzhen didn't even glance at Xingyue. He looked at the stall, the boxes, the crowd. Then he looked back at Junwei. All goods at this stall, he said, each word dropping like a stone, are drawn from the official surplus inventory of Shilling Fortress, logged and taxed under the fortress's general provisioning license, which covers salt, iron, and civilian goods for garrison support. He paused, letting the bureaucratic weight of the statement settle. The license number is registered with the provincial ministry. Would you care to inspect the documentation? I can have it fetched from the garrison records. It will take approximately 2 hours. The silence was absolute. Junwei's face went pale. He had overplayed his hand, trying to use civilian law against a military entity that operated under its own, complex codes. Or, Morongzhen continued, his voice dropping to a conversational level that was somehow more terrifying, you can apologize for implying my household engages in crime, and then you can leave. My brother and sister have customers waiting. It was a rout. Junjie stiffened, his scholar's pride wounded. Jiwonhu looked ready to fight but was held back by Junwei's restraining hand. Xinyao's mask of pity had cracked, revealing sheer, undiluted hatred for a fleeting second before she recomposed herself. Junwei forced a smile. A misunderstanding. Our apologies. We will not disturb your commerce further. He turned and led his siblings away, their retreat as conspicuous as their arrival. The crowd, sensing the drama was over and the Murongs had won, surged back toward the stall with renewed enthusiasm. Morongjin looked at Xinyue. For a second, their eyes met. There was no warmth there, but the glacial disapproval was also absent. It was simply assessment. Then he gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod to Morong Lei. Keep the noise down. The provincial governor's party arrives soon. He turned and walked back toward the pavilion. Morong Lei let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and clapped Xinyue on the shoulder, a jarring but not unkind gesture. See? Told you we'd make a killing. Now, stop gaping and count the coins. We've got a line. As Xinyue sat back down, her hand steady on the tally sheet, she felt it. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was something harder, more durable. It was the solid click of a gate locking behind her. She had faced her past in the open, and the new wall she stood behind had held. The Kong family's weapons, shame, accusation, social pressure had glanced off the stone facade of Murong authority and her own newfound practicality. She looked at the retreating backs of her blood family, already scheming their next move. Then she looked at the bustling Murong pavilion, at Morong Lei laughing with a customer, at the distant, straight back of Morong Zhen. The festival was a marketplace. And today, she had understood the currency here was not just silver, but power, loyalty, and the sheer, unbreakable will to hold your ground. She picked up her brush, dipped it in ink, and carefully recorded another 8 coppers. The ledger of her new life was filling up, one transaction at a time. The humiliating retreat of the Kong family from the mystery stall was a sweet, public victory, but it left a bitter aftertaste of vigilance in Xinyue's mouth. She knew them. Retreat was only a prelude to a more cunning counterattack. The festival buzzed around them for days, their stall a consistent hub of activity and profit, but her eyes kept scanning the crowds for a flash of lilac silk or the cold smirk of her brothers. The epicenter of the festival's excitement, however, was shifting. The martial tournament was upon them. The tournament grounds were a world unto themselves, a vast, sandy arena surrounded by raised viewing platforms shaded by colorful canopies. The air smelled of sweat, leather, and the sharp, clean scent of crushed herbs scattered to keep the dust down. Nobility, officers, and wealthy merchants filled the stands, their wagers flying as fast as the gossip. Morong Lei was in his element. He moved through the preliminary bouts with the relentless efficiency of a landslide. He wasn't just winning, he was dictating the rhythm of each fight, demonstrating the controlled, invincible strength Xinyue had mentioned. He disarmed a swordsman with a clever twist of his spear, pinned a brute of a wrestler using leverage rather than brute force, and finished each match with a respectful salute that drew applause from the military judges and the crowd alike. From her seat in the Morong family's shaded platform, Xinyue watched with a knot of anxiety in her stomach that had nothing to do with his skill. She saw the Kong family across the arena. Junjie was pretending to read a scroll. Junwei was deep in conversation with a man wearing the insignia of a provincial grain registrar. Jiwonhu was glowering, his arms crossed over his chest, his earlier swagger diminished by Morong Lei's display. And Xinya. Xinya was watching Morong Lei with an intensity that made Xinyue's skin prickle. It wasn't admiration. It was the focus of a jeweler assessing a stone for its flaws. The semifinals arrived. Morong Lei's opponent was a hulking man from a northern garrison, all raw power and roaring aggression. The fight was brutal, a clash of opposing philosophies. Morong Lei was pushed to his limits, dancing on the edge of the arena, using his speed and technique to deflect crushing blows. Xinyue found herself on her feet, her nails biting into her palms. Next to her, Morongjin sat motionless, but his eyes tracked every move like a hawk. Finally, Morong Lei saw an opening a fraction of a second when the northerner overextended. He didn't strike to maim. He swept the man's legs, planted his spear in the sand by the man's head, and offered a hand up. The crowd erupted. It was a perfect victory, dominant yet honorable. As he walked back to the preparation area, sweat-drenched and grinning, Xinya suddenly appeared at the edge of the competitor's aisle, a delicate porcelain cup in her hand. She said something to him, her face a mask of gentle concern, and offered the cup. Morong lay, flushed and thirsty from the fight, waved her off with a grunt of thanks but did not take it. Xinya's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened for a blink before she melted back into the crowd. Xinyue's blood ran cold. She knew that look. It was the look Xinya got when a servant failed to follow an unspoken order. The final match was set, Morong Lei versus the tournament's surprise contender, a fluid, graceful fighter from a southern naval academy named Shen, who used twin-hooked blades. Before the final call, Xinyue slipped from the Morong platform. She moved not toward the competitors' area, but around the back of the stands, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had no proof, only a lifetime of learned paranoia and the memory of a teacup offered with dead eyes. She found the bustling, muddy area behind the preparation tents. Grooms held horses, attendants carried buckets of water and linens, and tired fighters milled about. And there, partially hidden behind a rack of practice weapons, was Jiwenhu. He wasn't alone. He was speaking urgently to a weasel-faced man in the plain clothes of an arena attendant, pressing a small leather pouch into the man's hand. The attendant nodded swiftly and scurried toward the tent where the finalists were preparing. Xinyue didn't think. She acted. She picked up a full bucket of murky washwater left by a groom and walked directly into the attendant's path. Oops. The collision was perfectly clumsy. Icy, dirty water sloshed over both of them, soaking them to the skin. The pouch flew from the attendant's grip, landing in the mud. You idiot, the man spat, scrambling for the pouch. So sorry. Let me help. Xinyue gasped, falling to her knees in the muck beside him, her hand slapping through the mud, not to retrieve the pouch, but to grope for its contents. Her fingers closed around a small, wax paper packet within. As the attendant snatched the muddy pouch away, she palmed the packet, hiding it in her soaked sleeve. Get lost, you clumsy girl, the man hissed, checking the pouch before darting a terrified look toward Jiwenhu and then hurrying away. Jiwenhu had seen the collision. His eyes met Xinyue's across the yard. They widened in recognition, then narrowed into slits of pure venom. He took a step toward her, but just then, the drums boomed for the final match. He hesitated, shot her one last murderous glare, and turned to go watch. Shaking, Xinyue stumbled behind a stack of timber. She pulled the wax paper packet from her sleeve. It was filled with a fine, pale green powder. She didn't need Jiwenhu's past drunken boasts to identify it. Mist of the dazed spirit. A knockout powder. Fast-acting, odorless when mixed in liquid. Meant to be blown into a fighter's face or, more insidiously, slipped into their drink. Her mind raced. The attendant was still headed for the preparation tent. He could have more. Or he could simply tell Jiwenhu and Xinya the attempt had failed. They would adapt. She couldn't warn the officials without evidence and without exposing her own suspicious knowledge. She couldn't get to Morong Lei in time. But she could alter the variable. She ran, not toward the arena, but toward the Morong family's private festival pavilion. She burst in, finding Morongjin reviewing a dispatch with a guard captain. Eldest young master, she gasped, breathless and dripping mud. He looked up, his expression freezing at her disheveled state. What is the meaning of this? No time for delicacy. An attempt is being made to sabotage the final match. Against fourth young master. She held out the muddy wax paper packet. Knockout powder. I intercepted it. The man who carried it is in the competitor's area. I believe my brother Jiwenhu and sister Xinya are behind it. The guard captain stared in shock. Morongjin's face didn't change, but the temperature in the tent seemed to drop 10 degrees. He took the packet, sniffed it carefully, his eyes turning to chips of glacial ice. You, he said to the captain, his voice lethally quiet. Secure the competitor's area. Detain any attendant matching her description. Do it quietly. Do not disrupt the match unless you see an act in progress. The captain saluted and ran. Morongjin's gaze swung back to Xinyue. You are covered in filth. You intercepted it how? I spilled water on the courier. I stole the packet from the mud. It sounded absurd. Your family, he stated, the words flat. Yes. Why tell me? Why not let it happen? Your brother Jiwenhu would benefit from Lei's disgrace. The question was a blade, testing her core. Xinyue met his icy stare, her own fear hardening into something solid. Because he is my brother in name only. Because they tried to kill me once. And because Morong Lei may be an arrogant, loudmouthed, insufferable. She took a breath, but he is honest. And he is, for better or worse, under this family's roof. My loyalty is here. It was bought with inkstone and laughter, not with blood. For a long, suspended moment, he simply looked at her. Then, he gave a single, sharp nod. Go. Clean up. Watch the match. Do not speak of this to anyone. The final match was a masterpiece of tension. Morong Lei and Shen were beautifully matched power versus fluidity, spear against twin hooks. The crowd was on its feet, roaring with every clash. Xingyue, now in a clean borrowed robe, watched with her heart in her throat. Every time Shen feinted close, she expected to see a puff of powder. Every time Morong Lei reached for his water skin, she held her breath. But no sabotage came. The match raged on, fair and fierce. Morongzhen's intervention had cleaned the field. It was in the final minute that Morong Lei, pushing for a decisive victory, overcommitted a thrust. Shen, a true artist of combat, used the momentum, hooking the spear shaft and spinning inside Morong Lei's guard. The butt of Shen's blade connected with a clean, sharp thock against Lei's temple. Morong Lei staggered, his eyes glazing. He fell to one knee, his spear dropping from nerveless fingers. The arena gasped. Shen stepped back, saluting, the victory his. But as the judges moved to declare it, Morong Lei shook his head, a bull shaking off a blow. He blinked, looked at his empty hands, at Shen, and then at the sand. He raised a hand to his head, felt the swelling knot, and then, he laughed. A rough, genuine sound. He got to his feet, picked up his spear, and saluted Shen with deep, unwavering respect. A beautiful move, he called out, his voice carrying. You beat me fair. Well fought. The applause that followed was thunderous, different from before. It was applause for sheer heart, for sportsmanship, for the dignity in defeat. Morong Lei walked out of the arena not as a champion, but as a warrior who had earned something perhaps more valuable, universal respect. Later, in the medical tent, as a physician checked his head, Morong Lei looked at Xingyue, who lingered at the entrance. You look terrible, he said, his grin lopsided from the swelling. So do you, she replied. He chuckled, then winced. I lost. You saw the move that beat you. You'll learn it. And you won the crowd. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah. Maybe. He eyed her. You were yelling. During the fight. I heard you. His left side. She flushed. I was invested. He nodded slowly, then his expression turned serious. Zhen told me. About the powder. About what you did. So Morongzhen had told him. Xingyue waited for the backlash, for his pride to revolt at the idea of her interference. Instead, Morong Lei looked down at his hands, his fists clenching and unclenching. They tried to poison me, he said, the words heavy with a new kind of understanding. Not beat me. Poison me. Because they couldn't face me in the light. He looked up at her, his usual fire banked into smoldering coals. You stopped them. You, who they call sister. They stopped being my family the moment they valued their ambition over my life, Xingyue said softly. Morong Lei held her gaze for a long moment. Then he grunted. Well. Next time you decide to play spy and thief, try not to look like you lost a fight with a pig wallow. It's embarrassing for the household. It was his version of thanks. It was enough. As she left the tent, she saw Morongzhen speaking with the guard captain. The captain shook his head. The weasel-faced attendant had vanished, likely warned by Jiwenhu after the failed handoff. There would be no public evidence, no satisfying arrest. But as Xingyue walked back through the festival grounds, now lit by countless lanterns against the twilight, she felt the shift. The Kong family's plot had been thwarted. Morong Lei knew the truth of their venom. And Morongzhen, he had listened to her. He had acted on her word. She hadn't won a tournament. But she had protected a member of her new pack. And in the economy of the Wolf Den, that was a currency more solid than gold, more lasting than any trophy. The battle lines were no longer just between her and her past. They were now drawn, clearly and irrevocably, between the House of Morong and the venom of the Kong. And for the first time, Xingyue stood firmly, unambiguously, on one side. The dust of the festival settled, but the ground had shifted beneath Xinyue's feet. The thwarted poisoning plot was an unspoken secret among the Murongs, a dark, shared knowledge that bound them tighter in silent vigilance. The dowager said nothing directly, but her next gift to Xinyue was not an inkstone or a challenge, but a small, razor-sharp dagger in a plain leather sheath. For peeling fruit, the old woman had grunted, her eyes speaking volumes about the kind of fruit she meant. Life at the fortress resumed its austere rhythm, but the quality of Xinyue's daily interactions had changed. Moronglay no longer pretended she was invisible. He'd grunt a greeting, sometimes even ask her opinion on a new grip for his spear. It was rough, but it was recognition. Morong Feng, impressed by the festival stall's profits, began consulting her on minor logistical puzzles: inventory turns, the psychology of pricing. Morongli simply stared at her less like a specimen and more like a moderately interesting anomaly. Morongjin remained an iceberg, but the nature of the ice seemed different. His critiques of her studies were as sharp as ever, but they lacked the subtext of wanting her to fail. They were simply corrections. Once, after she dissected a historical account of a siege not for its heroic narrative but for its fatal supply line error, he had paused, tapped a single character on her parchment, and said, "This term. Bottleneck. It is apartment. Use it." It was the closest thing to academic praise she would ever get from him. It was during a lesson on celestial navigation, a topic she'd begged to learn, citing the fortress's need to coordinate with coastal forces, that the first rumble of the coming storm arrived, not from the heavens, but from a messenger. A guard entered the study, bowing hastily to Morongjin. "Young master, a report from the southern patrols." "And news from Luojiang." Morongjin took the sealed dispatches. He read the patrol report first, his brow furrowing. Heavier than usual spring rains in the southern valleys. The Silverthread River is swelling past its banks in the farmlands. He broke the second seal, his eyes scanning the lines from a Morong agent in the provincial capital. A faint, cold smirk touched his lips, a rare and unsettling expression. "It seems," he said, looking up at Xinyue, "your former family has been busy in their ruin." He handed her the report. It was concise. The Kong family, bankrupt from their failed grain hoard and publicly humiliated at the festival, had been evicted from their estate. Their mortgaged properties had been seized. Kong Ziyuan, stripped of his official rank due to gross fiscal mismanagement and destabilizing speculation, was now a disgraced commoner. Junjia's scholarly reputation was in tatters, linked to his father's disgrace. Junwei was being pursued by creditors. Juan, whose leg had healed poorly, leaving him with a permanent limp and a corrosive bitterness. They were living, the report stated, in a dilapidated rental property in the poorest quarter of Luojiang. The mighty rise Xinya had prophesied had crumbled to mud before it ever began. Xinyue felt nothing. No triumph. No pity. Just a hollow, quiet finality, like the closing of a heavy tomb door. They had built their palace on the sand of her stolen labor and future knowledge, and the first tide had washed it away. The rain, Morongjin said, pulling her attention back to the first report. The southern valleys feed the main river that curves around Luojiang before reaching the plains. If this continues, a memory, sharp and cold as the dagger at her waist, sliced through her. The great flood of the 7th year of the Jinhe era. It had happened a year from now in her past life. A catastrophic deluge that had drowned entire villages, made refugees of thousands, and reshaped the political landscape. Kong Ziyuan's rise had begun with a clever, if callous, flood mitigation plan he presented after the disaster. But the rains were starting now. A year early. Had her rebirth changed the heavens themselves? Or was this simply a prelude, a warning of the greater deluge to come? "If it continues," Xinyue said, her voice steady, "Luojiang's lower wards will be under water by the Dragon Boat Festival. The floodplains will become lakes. The city's outer dikes are decorative, not defensive. They were built by a corrupt magistrate who pocketed the funds for proper stonework." Morongjin's gaze was piercing. "How could you possibly know the state of Luojiang's dikes?" She had walked those dikes with Junwei in her past life, listening to him calculate the cost of their shoddy repair. "My second brother complained about them once. He saw a business opportunity in their eventual failure." It was half the truth, wrapped in a credible lie. He absorbed this, his strategist's mind already mapping the implications. A flood of that magnitude would cause chaos. Starvation. Disease. It would destabilize the entire province. And, Xinyue added quietly, it would be an opportunity for those prepared to offer order, relief, and solutions. Their eyes met. The unspoken understanding hung between them. The Kong family was broken. But a natural disaster on this scale was a vacuum, and vacuums were filled by either heroes or predators. The Morong fortress, high and dry on its plateau, with its military discipline and stockpiles, could be the former. It could also expand its influence dramatically. We need a plan, Morongjin said. It was not a suggestion. It was a mobilization order. Not just for fortifying our position, but for mitigating the disaster. True strength is not just weathering the storm, but preventing the village from drowning. For the next several days, Xinyue's world contracted to the war room. She was not a formal advisor, but Morongjin began having her remain after her lessons, a living reference text on Luojiang's infrastructure and the Kong family's past, failed, ventures. She pored over maps, pointing out vulnerable villages, suggesting locations for emergency stockpiles based on trade routes she'd memorized from Junwei's old ledgers. She proposed a radical idea, using a network of old, half-forgotten irrigation canals north of Luojiang to create a controlled spillway, diverting the flood's fury into a vast, barren salt flat used for nothing but military exercises. It would save the city and the fertile lands to the south. The engineering would be immense, Morongfeng said, fascinated by the scale. The labor. Refugees can be paid in food and shelter to become the labor, Xinyue countered. It gives them purpose, not just charity. It turns a cost into an investment. Morongjin watched these exchanges, his silence more potent than speech. He was integrating her, piece by piece, into the fortress's strategic mind. The rains began in earnest over Shieling, a cold, relentless curtain that turned the world gray. One afternoon, as Xinyue was translating a captured text on Western siege engines, a task Morongjin had set her to test her metal anti-Tau entered, her face unreadable. Miss, you have visitors. At the western postern gate. They are insisting. A cold knot formed in Xinyue's stomach. She knew who it was. She found them huddled under a ragged oilcloth just outside the small, heavily guarded gate. Kong Ziyuan looked 10 years older, his fine robes replaced by patched, damp cotton. Junjia's scholarly haughtiness had curdled into a sullen, shivering resentment. Junwei's eyes were those of a cornered rat, darting, calculating even in ruin. Juanhu leaned on a crude crutch, his face a mask of pain and hatred. And Xinya. She stood slightly apart, her hair plastered to her scalp by the rain, her once pristine lilac dress stained and sodden. But her back was straight, and her eyes, when they lifted to meet Xinyue's, burned with a fire that the rain could not extinguish. Sister, Xinya said, her voice cutting through the drumming rain. You see our state. We have come to seek reconciliation. Kong Ziyuan stepped forward, attempting his old patriarchal authority, but it rang hollow. Xinyue. Daughter. Your family is in distress. The bonds of blood cannot be so easily severed. We admit to past misunderstandings. We ask for your compassion. A word from you to the general, shelter, perhaps a minor position. Xinyue looked at them, these architects of her death, standing in the rain they had been too arrogant to foresee. The hollow feeling filled with a calm, granite certainty. There is no misunderstanding, Xinyue said, her voice clear and carrying. There was a calculation. I was the expendable variable. You calculated wrong. She looked at Xinya. You told me I would weep at my choice. I look at you, standing in the mud, and I feel only the dryness of my own eyes. Junjia snarled. You heartless shrew. We raised you. You used me. Until I was used up. She turned her gaze to her father. You speak of blood bonds. I remember the weight of the dagger in my gut. Your blood bond felt remarkably like cold steel. Juanhu lurched forward on his crutch. We should have killed you slower. Xinya held up a hand, silencing him. Her eyes never left Xinyue's. You have won this round, sister. You have your fortress, your new brothers. But do not think it is over. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper only Xinyue could hear. You have the past. But her hand moved almost imperceptibly to rest on her abdomen, a gesture of profound, shocking significance. I have the future. The world tilted. Xinya was pregnant. In the depth of their ruin, she had secured some form of leverage, some alliance or desperate pact that left her carrying a child. A new piece on the board. Xinya saw the understanding dawn in Xinyue's eyes and smiled, a terrifying crescent of triumph in her drowned rat face. A life for a life, they say. You took my family's future. I am making a new one. And when this child is born, the world will realign. Remember that, while you hide behind your stone walls. She turned, without another word, and walked back into the sheeting rain. The Kong men, confused and defeated, shuffled after her, leaving Xinyue standing at the gate, the cold seeping through her robes. Morongzhen's voice spoke from the shadows of the gatehouse behind her. He had been listening. A snake sheds its skin, he said, stepping into the light. It does not change its nature. It only grows a new weapon. Xinyue watched the gray shadows of her past dissolve into the rain. She is carrying a child, she said, the words tasting of cold iron. I heard, Morongzhen replied. An unknown father. A desperate gambit. It changes nothing about the coming flood. It only means the snake will seek higher ground. We must ensure our ground is highest, and our walls are impervious to both water and venom. He looked at her, his expression grim. The time for studying is over, Kong Xinyue. The storm is here. It is time to build. He was right. The past had come begging at her gate, and she had turned it away. But the past was not finished. It was evolving, wearing a new face, carrying new life as its shield and weapon. As she followed Morongzhen back into the heart of the fortress, the drumming rain seemed to chant a new rhythm. It was no longer just the sound of weather. It was the sound of borrowed time running out. The calm before the true deluge. And Xinyue knew, with every fiber of her reborn being, that she would need to be not just a survivor, or a strategist, but a dam against the rising tide of all the vengeful past yet to come. The rain did not cease. It became the world a pounding, gray eternity that blurred the lines between day and night, between the fortress and the drowning plains below. Shiling's high plateau kept it secure, but it became an island in a roaring, muddy sea. From the watchtowers, Xinyue could see the terrifying transformation. The gentle Silverthread River was now a monstrous, churning brown serpent, swallowing fields, roads, and outlying homesteads. The distant rooftops of Luojiang's lower wards poked above the water like the tombstones of a sunken city. Inside the fortress, a different kind of torrent raged, one of disciplined mobilization. Morongzhen's war room was a map-choked hive of controlled urgency. The radical plan, the diversion into the salt flat, was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was a desperate race against the rising waterline. Xinyue was now a permanent fixture in that room. Her role had crystallized from reference text to civilian logistics coordinator. She knew which villages had granaries, where the blacksmiths clustered, which elders could be relied upon and which would hoard. Her past life memories of the flood's aftermath, paired with her knowledge of the region's people, made her invaluable. The village of Willow Bend will be cut off next, she said, pointing to a spot on the large lacquered map. But their headman, Old Gua, is stubborn as a mule. He won't order an evacuation until the water is at his doorstep. Send Captain Liang. He gambles with Old Gua. He'll listen to him. Morongzhen gave a curt nod to the waiting officer. Do it. Use the shallow draft boats. The salt flat diversion, Morongfeng said, tracing the canal lines with a merchant's eye for flow. We need to breach the old northern levee here, and here. It will take 200 men working in shifts. The refugees from Pine Ridge Camp have the numbers, but they're weak from hunger. Then we feed them first, Xinyue insisted. A full belly digs faster than a desperate one. Set up the gruel stations at the worksite. They eat, they work. They see the direct result of their labor saving their own downstream kin. It's not charity, it's a wage. Morongzhen's mouth tightened, but he didn't contradict her. It was sound, if unorthodox, military logic: sustain your workforce. The dowager oversaw it all from her chair by the hearth, her gimlet eyes missing nothing. She said little, but her presence was the keystone holding the arch of their effort together. They received reports from Luojiang. Chaos. The provincial governor, a courtier more adept at poetry than hydrology, was paralyzed. The Kong family, from their hovel, was trying to re-enter the game. Kong Ziyuan and Junjie had penned a memorial on water management, a thinly veiled rehash of the plan that had brought him fame in Xinyue's past life. But this time it was dismissed as the ramblings of a disgraced fool. Their credibility was mud. Xinya's pregnancy, however, was beginning to circulate as a twisted piece of gossip. Whispers said the father was a minor, desperate noble from a failing house, or a wealthy merchant from the south looking for a connection to old blood. It was a scandal, but it was also a hook. She was no longer just a ruined daughter, she was a vessel of potential alliance. Xinyue understood her sister's move perfectly. In the shipwreck, Xinya had clung not to a plank, but to a lifeline connected to another, potentially still floating ship. That lifeline arrived at Shiling's gates a week into the crisis, in the form of a luxurious, rain-slicked litter borne by 8 strong porters, escorted by private guards. A man emerged, Lord Bai, a famously wealthy and reclusive magnate from the coastal trade cities. He was middle-aged, with a kind, tired face and eyes that held the deep, calm calculation of immense power. He had come, he said, to offer aid. His ships, trapped by the floods, were laden with grain and medicine. He wished to coordinate with the Murong relief efforts. But his eyes, during the formal audience with General Murong and Murong Zhen, kept drifting to the maps, to the organized bustle, with a peculiar intensity. Later, while Lord Bai toured the refugee settlements with Murong Feng, Auntie Tao found Xinyue. "The noble guest," she whispered, her face uneasy. "He asked after you." "Specifically?" He said, he heard of the Kong daughter with a mind for practical things. A cold trickle, unrelated to the damp, went down Xinyue's spine. She found Morongzhen on the wall walk, staring out at the drowned world. "Lord Bai," she said without preamble. "He's not just here for philanthropy." "No," Morongzhen agreed, his voice low. "His second wife died in childbirth last winter. He needs a new wife. One with connections to the interior, to a military house, however strained. One who can manage his complex estates. He has heard of Kong Ziyuan's clever, wrong daughter who is now under the Murong's tutelage. Xinya. He was here for Xinya. The lifeline had a face, and it was powerful beyond their worst fears. A marriage to Lord Bai would instantly resurrect the Kong family from the muck. It would give Xinya a platform, wealth, and influence that could rival a general's. "He will go to Luojiang next," Xinyue said, certainty clenching her stomach. "He will see her, pregnant, proud in her ruin. He will see it as resilience. He will offer marriage. And she will accept," Morongzhen finished. "Transforming a scandal into a strategic alliance." He turned to her, his profile sharp against the gray sky. "It changes the board. A hostile Kong family with Bai's wealth behind them is a different enemy. They will not forget who turned them away at the gate." The implications unspooled like a treacherous current. Lord Bai's resources could undermine Murong efforts, could sway officials, could even challenge the fortress's post-flood dominance in the region. Xinya, with a child in her womb and a lord's ring on her finger, would have everything she needed to wage a cold war against Xinyue and the house that sheltered her. "We cannot stop the marriage," Xinyue said, the realist in her conceding. "But we can diminish its power." "How?" "By making sure that when Lord Bai looks at Jiangzhou after the flood, he doesn't see a Kong resurgence. He sees a Murong fortress that is the undisputed source of order, stability, and future prosperity. He must see alignment with us as more valuable than allegiance to them." She met his gaze. "The Salt Flat diversion isn't just about saving lives. It's about demonstrating who can command the very waters. We need to succeed, spectacularly. And we need him to witness it." A faint, grim light sparked in Morongzhen's eyes. It was the look he got before a risky maneuver on the battlefield. "Then we will show him." The climax came 3 days later. The main levee protecting Luojiang's southern granary district was groaning, seconds from failure, which would drown the city's food reserves and thousands of people. The Murong plan was ready, but it was a knife-edge gamble. They had to blow the old northern levee to start the diversion before the southern one broke, or they'd unleash 2 torrents at once. From a command post on a hill overlooking the vast, churning landscape, the key players watched. General Murong, stern and silent. Morongzhen, a statue of focused will. Lord Bai, wrapped in fine furs, his face unreadable. And Xinyue, standing a little behind them, her heart hammering against her ribs. Down in the chaos of the Salt Flat, Murong lay, covered in mud, directed the final placements of the blasting charges. Refugees, now organized into work crews, were pulled back to safety. Morongzhen raised a signal flag. A series of deep, coughing thumps echoed across the water, felt in the bones more than heard. A section of the distant northern embankment dissolved in a gout of mud and water. The hungry flood, finding the new, lower path, roared toward the barren Salt Flat with a sound like 1,000 dragons. They watched, breath held, as the colossal surge of brown water rushed into the vast, empty basin, spreading, slowing, being swallowed by the thirsty, cracked earth. It was a breathtaking, terrifying display of human audacity trying to bend nature's wrath. Minutes ticked by. The southern levee, relieved of the unbearable pressure, held. The frantic repairs by the city's panicked workers suddenly became viable. A ragged cheer went up from the Morong troops and the refugee crews below. They had done it. They had stolen the flood's fangs. Lord Bai let out a long, slow breath. He turned from the spectacle to General Morong, his respect palpable. A masterstroke, General. You have not only saved a city, you have demonstrated a level of command I have rarely seen. His eyes then found Xingyue, acknowledging her presence with a thoughtful nod. And I see the mind behind the maps is as sharp as rumored. It was a public, irrevocable legitimization. The Murons were no longer just border warriors, they were the saviors of Jiangzhou. As they descended the hill, a messenger, spattered with mud from hard riding, found Murong Zhen. He listened, then walked over to Xingyue and Lord Bai. News from Luojiang, he said, his voice neutral. Lord Bai, it seems your journey to the city will have one less item of business. The Kong family, in their rented dwelling, was caught in a secondary landslide caused by the saturated ground. The structure collapsed. The world narrowed to the sound of the rain. Survivors? Lord Bai asked, his voice carefully modulated. The sons and the father were pulled from the rubble. Injured, but alive. The daughter, Kong Xinya, Morongzhen's gaze flickered to Xingyue for a fraction of a second. She was found shielding a small wooden chest. She did not survive. Nor did the child. Silence, filled only with the relentless rain. Xinya's lifeline, her future, her vengeance snapped by a lump of falling earth. The cruel, random fist of the very disaster she had tried to exploit. Lord Bai closed his eyes for a moment, a man adjusting a ledger. A tragedy, he said quietly. The folly of building on unstable ground. He offered his condolences to Xingyue, who stood frozen, feeling nothing and everything at once. When he moved away to speak with the general, Morongzhen remained beside her. Was it? Xingyue whispered, her voice raw. The landslide. Was it random? Morongzhen looked out at the churning waters now safely filling the salt flat. The rains weaken everything, he said, his voice as impenetrable as the fortress stone. Hillsides. Foundations. Alliances. Some collapses are inevitable. He did not look at her. The ground beneath her was always unstable. The rain simply revealed it. He walked away, leaving her alone in the downpour. Xinya was gone. The architect of her first death, the herald of her second struggle, erased by mud. There should have been relief. There should have been triumph. But as Xingyue stood in the cleansing, drowning rain, watching the murky water settle into its new, man-made lake, she felt only a vast, hollow exhaustion. The most dangerous viper was gone. But the poison was still in the soil, in the memories of the broken men who survived, in the endless, dripping sky. The flood was being tamed. The immediate enemy was dead. But the war for her life, it seemed, was not against people, but against the very current of fate, a current that could bury palaces, collapse hovels, and wash away futures in its indifferent, muddy flow. She had helped build a dam against the water. Now, she had to learn how to build one against the silence that came after. In the wake of the flood and Xinya's death, a strange, hollow silence settled over Xingyue. The relentless drumming of rain softened to a drizzle, then ceased, leaving a world scrubbed raw and dripping. The salt flat was now a vast, shallow lake, a placid monument to human intervention. Luojiang, battered but saved, began the slow, muddy work of recovery, its gratitude firmly fixed on the Morong name. There should have been victory in her bones. The great deluge she feared had been tamed. The sister who had haunted both her lives was gone, her final, desperate gambit buried under a landslide of literal mud. The Kong men were broken, physically and spiritually, reduced to whispers and charity cases in a city that now despised them. Yet, as Xingyue walked the damp, sun-dappled battlements of Xiling, she felt untethered. For so long, every breath had been drawn in opposition to her family, to her past, to the coming storm. Now, the storm had passed. The opposition was gone. What was she, without the fight? The fortress, however, had no time for existential malaise. It was a machine transitioning from disaster relief to political consolidation. Morong Feng was already negotiating new trade agreements with Lord Bai and other magnates, using the goodwill as capital. Morong Zhen was absorbed in the reorganization of regional defenses, his influence now stretching far beyond the border. Morong Lei was training a new cohort of recruits from among the fittest refugees. Even Morong Li was busy, studying the flood's impact on local insect populations with ghoulish fascination. The dowager found her in the library one afternoon, staring unseeingly at a scroll on aquatic engineering. The old woman sat down heavily across from her, her cane propped against the table. The quiet after the battle is always louder than the battle itself, the dowager stated, her obsidian eyes seeing right through her. You spent so long bracing for the blow, you forgot how to stand straight when it didn't land. Xingyue looked at her hands. I thought I would feel something. Vindication. Or at least, peace. Peace? The dowager snorted. Peace is for gardens and tombs. You are in a fortress. Here, there is only readiness. The flood is gone. The viper is dead. Good. Now the ground is soft for new foundations. What will you build? It was the question that had been haunting her. What did she want? Not just survival. Not just revenge. Those fires had burned down to ash. I don't know, Xingyue admitted, the truth tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. Then learn, the dowager said, not unkindly. You have an inkstone. You have a mind that can divert rivers. Figure out what harbor you want those rivers to feed. She pushed herself up. Start by living, girl. Not just surviving. The opportunity to live came in an unexpected form. An invitation arrived from the Luojiang City Magistrates, a festival of gratitude to honor the Morong family. It was a political pageant, of course, but also the first real celebration since the disaster. Lady Suyin fretted over robes. The general decided which sons would attend for maximum political effect. Morong Zhen, as the operational mastermind, could not refuse. And, to Xingyue's surprise, the invitation included her. Not as an afterthought, but by name, and the esteemed Kong Xingyue, for her invaluable aid in logistics and planning. It was her first public acknowledgement as an individual, separate from her mother or her tragic family name. It was terrifying. The night before the festival, as she was checking over a simple but elegant jade green gown provided by Morong Feng's tailors, a small, cloth-wrapped package was delivered to her room. There was no note. Inside, nestled in plain cotton, was a hairpin. Not gold or jade, but finely wrought steel, shaped like a slender, unfurling fern frond. It was beautiful in its stark, functional elegance. It was also unmistakably a weapon, its tip needle-sharp. There was only one person who would give such a gift. She looked at it for a long time before carefully sliding it into her hair. It felt like a vote of confidence, and a reminder. Luojiang was transformed. The mud had been scoured from the main squares, and lanterns hung from every surviving eave, not hiding the damage, but defiantly illuminating the rebuild. The air buzzed with a palpable relief. When the Morong contingent arrived, the cheers were genuine, not ceremonial. Xingyue walked beside her mother, a step behind Morong Zhen and the general. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, heard the murmurs. That's her, the Kong girl who helped. Heard she reads maps like poetry. Looks strong, not like that wilting sister of hers. She kept her head high, the steel hairpin a cool, comforting weight. The festival was a blur of speeches, toasts, and performances. Xingyue smiled until her face ached, accepted thanks gracefully, and deflected probing questions about her unique insights with vague references to fortress records and observation. During a lull, she found herself on a quieter terrace overlooking the newly calmed river. The moon painted a silver path on the dark water. They don't know what to make of you. Morongzhen's voice came from the shadows beside a pillar. He held a cup of wine, untouched. Do you? Xingyue asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. He was silent for a moment. I am beginning to, he said finally. You are not a puzzle to be solved. You are a new algorithm. You input chaos and output order. It is a valuable function. It was the most analytical compliment imaginable. From him, it felt like a laurel wreath. A function needs a purpose, she replied, echoing the dowager. What is my purpose now? The chaos is over. Is it? He gestured with his chin toward the glittering crowd inside. This is a different kind of chaos. A chaos of opportunity, of shifting alliances. Your mind, which understands the flow of grain and the strength of dikes, can also understand the flow of influence and the strength of alliances. He turned to look at her directly, his face half in moonlight, half in shadow. You asked me once who I thought you were. A variable. I was wrong. You are a catalyst. The question is, what reaction do you wish to catalyze? He was offering her a place. Not just shelter, but a role. A real one. Before she could answer, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the night. Sister. How radiant you look, basking in our family's ruin. Junwei stood at the entrance to the terrace, leaning on a cane, his fine clothes hanging loose on his gaunt frame. His eyes were fever-bright with hatred and cheap wine. Morongjin moved almost imperceptibly, placing himself slightly between Xingyue and her brother. You are not welcome here, Morongjin said, his voice low and deadly. This is a public festival, Junwei slurred. I came to congratulate my sister. To see the remarkable function she has become for her new masters. His gaze raked over her. Xinyao always said you were a tool. She just underestimated what a useful tool you'd be for someone else. The old hurt, the old anger, tried to rise. But it felt distant, like the echo of a shout in a vast canyon. She looked at Junwei, the shrunken, bitter shell of the cunning merchant, and felt not rage, but a profound, weary pity. You are drunk, second brother, Xingyue said, her voice calm, carrying on the still air. You should go home. The ground there is unstable. You might fall. It was a simple statement of fact. But it held the memory of landslides and collapsing houses. Junwei's bravado cracked. Fear flickered in his eyes. He took a step back, muttering curses, and disappeared into the darkness. The silence he left behind was different. It was clean. Morongjin hadn't moved. You didn't need my intervention, he observed. No, Xingyue said, realizing it was true. I didn't. He nodded, as if she'd passed another test. Then he did something extraordinary. He set his untouched wine cup on the balustrade and turned fully to her. The Dowager believes in building new foundations. So does the general. I have come to see the logic in it. He paused, the strategist weighing his next move. This alliance, between our house and your unique capabilities. It has proven effective. It could be made more permanent. More efficient. Xinyue's heart stuttered. Was this a political proposition? A cold, logical merger? He saw the confusion on her face, and the faintest hint of a frown, almost frustration, touched his brow. I am not proposing a business contract, he said, the words seeming strangely difficult for him. I am stating that a partnership, in all matters, between us, would be strategically optimal. And, he hesitated, searching for a term outside his lexicon of war and governance, personally, agreeable. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more honest, and perhaps more enduring, from a man like him. It was a recognition of equal footing, of shared purpose, and a desire to face the future's chaos together. It was an offer to build, side by side. Xingyue looked at him, this stern, brilliant, awkward man who had gone from seeing her as a nuisance to valuing her as a catalyst. She looked at the moonlit river, symbol of the past she had diverted. She thought of the steel fern in her hair, a gift of readiness, not for a battle, but for a life. She thought of the Dowager's question, what will you build? She looked back at Morongjin, and a slow, true smile touched her lips, not one of triumph or survival, but of quiet, chosen anticipation. Strategically optimal, she repeated, her voice firm. And personally agreeable. I find that an exceptionally sound foundation. For the first time since she had known him, Morongjin's stern expression softened into something that was not quite a smile, but a profound, settled satisfaction. He gave a single, decisive nod. On the terrace above, unseen, the Dowager leaned on her cane, a small, smug grin on her wrinkled face. She turned and walked back toward the music, muttering to herself, took them long enough. Now, maybe we can get some real work done around here. Below, the river of the past flowed quietly into its new course, while on the terrace, two strategists began to draft the plans for a shared future, not on parchment, but in the understanding that passed silently between them in the moonlight. The war was over. The work was just beginning. The festival of gratitude was not an ending, but a punctuation mark, a firm, decisive comma in the narrative of Xinyue's life. The murmurs of the crowd, Junwei's drunken venom, and Morongjin's quiet, seismic proposition on the terrace all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth: she had crossed a threshold. There was no returning to the person she was, to the life she had left in the mud. The return to Shieling felt different. The fortress was no longer a shelter she had stumbled into, but a stronghold she was helping to build. The weight of the steel fern pin in her hair was a constant, pleasant reminder not of danger, but of belonging. A week after their return, the dowager summoned her to the now familiar study. The old woman wasn't alone. Morongjin stood by the map table, while General Morong sat in a carved chair, his presence filling the room. It was an informal council of the house's inner circle, and Xinyue's invitation was pointed. The province is stabilizing, General Morong began, his voice a low rumble. Our influence is secured. But influence must be administered. My sons have their duties. Zhen has the military and regional governance. Feng, commerce and supply. Lei, training and internal security. Li has his interests. He glanced at his second son, who was examining the grain of the wooden table as if it were a fascinating cadaver. The dowager took over. A household, a fortress, a province, it is an organism. It needs a mind that connects the parts. That sees how the grain from Fang's stores affects the morale of Lei's men, and how Zhen's border policies open or close Fang's trade routes. Her black eyes fixed on Xinyue. You have a mind that sees connections. You proved it with the flood. You proved it at the festival. The Kong logistics, the Morong strength. A useful hybrid. Morongjin spoke, his tone formal, as if presenting a tactical report. A position has been created. Advisor for Internal Cohesion and Strategic Logistics. It reports directly to the general and the dowager. It would involve coordinating between the departments of the household and the fortress, analyzing long-term projects, and, he paused, serving as a liaison for certain external, civilian matters where a nuanced touch is required. It was a job description crafted for her unique skills. A title, a responsibility, a place in the machine. It was everything she had been trained for in her first life, but this time, the authority would be real, her efforts her own. The salary, Morong Feng added with a merchant's grin, is negotiable. But we start with a 10% share of efficiency gains you identify. It was a real offer, with real power and real compensation. Not a favor, not charity. A contract. Xinyue looked at the three of them: the stern general, the shrewd dowager, the impassive but watchful Morongjin. This was her new family. Not by blood, but by choice, by trial, and now, by professional accord. I accept, she said, the words feeling like the turning of a great, well-oiled lock. The dowager nodded, satisfied. Good. Your first task. The fortress library is a disgrace. Military treatises mixed with poetry, logistic scrolls next to agricultural almanacs. Catalog it. Reorganize it. Make it a tool, not a tomb. It was a test, but a benevolent one. A task that required understanding the whole of the fortress's knowledge. As the meeting broke up, Morongjin lingered. There is another matter, he said, his voice dropping. Your remaining family. Your father and brothers. They are a potential source of instability. Resentment festering in the ruins can poison wells. Xinyue knew this. What do you propose? Exile is clean, but can create martyrs. Employment under watch is messy, but can neutralize. He waited, letting her choose. She thought of her father's cold eyes, Junjie's brittle pride, Junwei's venom, Juanhu's lame leg and lamer spirit. They were broken tools, but tools could still cut if left in the dirt. Give them a choice, she said. A supervised clerkship on the remote western border, cataloging garrison supplies. Far from here, far from Luojiang. Useful work, a meager but steady wage, under the eye of a commander who reports to you. Or, they can refuse and take their chances in the wider world with their reputation and their empty pockets. It was a merciful ruthlessness. It gave them a path to survive, but stripped them of all dignity and proximity. It was the kind of solution Morongjin himself would devise. He nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. It will be arranged. The following days were a whirlwind of new purpose. Xinyue took possession of a small office adjacent to the war room. She attacked the library with the fervor of a general conquering chaotic territory. She created a system, classifying knowledge not by tradition, but by function, defense, sustenance, commerce, history, theory. She found forgotten irrigation plans, obscure treaties, and talent rosters that hadn't been updated in a decade. With each scroll sorted, she felt she was ordering not just parchment, but the very mind of the fortress. One afternoon, as she was cross-referencing grain yield reports with population maps, a servant announced a visitor. Kang Ziyuan stood in the doorway of her office, looking shrunken and old in a clean but plain robe. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out defeat. "Daughter," he said, the word a sigh. "Master Kang," Xingyue replied, not looking up from her map. "You have received the offer from the Western Garrison?" "We have." He stepped inside, his hands clasped. "It is a bitter draft." "It is clean water," she corrected. "Which is more than you left me with." He flinched. "Xingyue, what happened with Xingya? It was a tragedy. We were wrong. About many things." Finally, she looked at him. "Acknowledgement is not absolution, father. It is simply a statement of fact. You were wrong. You chose her. You sacrificed me. The consequences of that choice are your life now. The Western Post is a consequence I choose to offer. Take it, or do not." There was no anger in her voice. It was the flat, factual tone of a clerk stating inventory. It was, she realized, the most devastating thing she could have done. He had come expecting fire, hoping for an emotional exchange where he could play the repentant patriarch. He found only the cool, efficient assessment of the Morong advisor for internal cohesion. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time not as a daughter, a tool, or a disappointment, but as a force in her own right. The last vestige of his parental illusion crumbled. He bowed his head, not in respect, but in surrender. "We will take the post." "Wise," she said, and returned to her maps. The night before the Kang men were to depart for the west, Morongjin came to her office. The fortress was quiet. He carried a small, flat box of polished Zeton wood. "A closing of accounts," he said, placing it on her desk. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, was a seal. Not the heavy, official seal of the Morong house, but a personal one. The handle was carved from pale jade in the shape of a phoenix, its wings folded as if in mid-descent, its eyes two tiny, fierce rubies. The base was blank, awaiting her mark. "A seal is authority," Morongjin said. "It is identity. You have been acting under the authority of this house. Now, you need your own." He placed a small chisel and a fine engraving tool next to the box. "The characters are yours to choose. To carve." He was giving her the ultimate power of self-definition. In a world where names and identities were given, borrowed, or stolen, he was handing her the tools to write her own. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked her eyes. She had not cried when they killed her. She had not cried when she was reborn, or when she faced the flood, or when Xingya died. But this quiet, profound gift of autonomy unlocked something deep and damned within her. She looked up at him, the tears making his stern face swim in her vision. "I don't know what to carve." For the first time, he smiled. It was a small, rare, genuine thing that softened the lines of his face. "That," he said, "is the point. The strategy is yours, Advisor Kang. I am merely providing the blank terrain." He left her then, alone with the seal and the silence. Xingyue sat for a long time, the cool jade phoenix warm in her hand. She thought of all the names she had been, the guilty twin. The useful daughter. The sacrifice. The refugee. The catalyst. The advisor. None felt complete. They were chapters, not the title. She thought of the inkstone from the dowager, for grinding her own words. She thought of the steel fern from Morongjin, for readiness. She thought of the lion dance banner, ugly and brave. She thought of the library taking shape around her, a mind being ordered. She picked up the engraving tool. Its point was fine and hard. She did not carve a name, or a title, or an aspiration. She carved 4 characters, clean and deep into the pale jadeite base, Yilu Weishu to record the unwritten. It was not a declaration of who she was, but a statement of what she would do. She would document the paths not taken, the connections unseen, the possibilities waiting in the blank spaces of the map and the ledger. She would be the author of the next, unwritten chapter for the fortress, for the province, and for herself. She inked the seal and pressed it onto a fresh sheet of paper. The impression was sharp, clear, and uniquely hers. The phoenix seemed to look upon the characters with its ruby eyes, as if in approval. From the doorway, the dowager observed, having watched the entire scene in silence. She turned and walked away, her cane tapping a soft, satisfied rhythm on the stone floor. The girl is no longer a refugee, she thought. She is an archivist of the future. And the future of this house just got infinitely more interesting. Outside, the first true stars of a clear, post-storm night emerged over Shieling. The season of floods was over. The season of building, of writing, of recording the unwritten, had just begun. And Kong Xinyue, with her blank seal and her ordered mind, was finally, unshakably, home.